Somehow I feel like I'm too far away. Well, yeah.
Everybody's sitting closer to me.
I know. You do have
Frank, did you shower today? Why is everyone sitting so far away from you?
Cooties.
What's that?
Cooties.
Cooties, yeah. Oh, yeah, people don't even know what those are.
Yes, it is. That's true. Oh wow.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. Here we are continuing with our project of understanding the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and therefore the particular view has this. I'm going to read a couple paragraphs here by Garchen Rinpoche in his book published in Malaysia, Instruction on the Six Bardos. He takes a verse, a poem, verses that are in the Tibetan Book of the Dead that correspond to each of the Bardos, and then he gives teachings on them. And it ends, and we've been talking so much about the Dalai Lama's discussion of the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the tantric view, and mentioning these three, what are called three bodies of the Buddha. So these three kind of ways that our Buddha nature exists, you might say, or manifests its qualities, being the Dharmakaya, the vastness of space, the Sambhogakaya, the tremendous power and form, but untouchability, so to speak, of the Sambhogakaya, and then the immediate tactile part of the Nirmanakaya, and which correspond to respectively the arising of the clear light after death, the Bardo, the Sidpa Bardo, the Bardo in between death and birth, and then birth again, which is obviously Nirmanakaya. So this is at the very end. He's discussing this whole process. We'll go into more of this another day, but he's talking about Rinpoche says, how can it be true to say that two people are also one? The Buddhist view is comprised of the two truths. There is the conventional truth, in which two people are two different people. But through love and compassion, one eliminates self-grasping, and when self-grasping is absent, one realizes the ultimate truth. Self and others do not exist apart from one another. Now our mind is the same. This understanding brings you closer to the view of Mahamudra, and through it you will attain freedom in this life, in future lives, and in the Bardo. To attain this goal, a pure perception is crucial. And of course, this is the essence of the Tantra, is pure perception. But what is pure perception? We ordinarily think that things are good or bad. We call certain people a friend and others an enemy. If we train in pure view, we gradually begin to see things as they actually are. An impure perception is only the projection of our own negative karma, afflictions, and habitual tendencies. In reality, things are pure. To perceive them impurely is to perceive them other than how they actually are. The essence of secret mantra is to cultivate a pure perception. But since we perceive things according to our habits, we must find a way to get beyond habitual perception. For this reason, everything depends on one's aspiration. When we practice in the Bodhisattva vehicle, we aspire to see all sentient beings as our parents, and as we habituate to this, we actually will see them as our parents. They really have been our parents on a conventional level of reality. If we do not train in pure perception, we will see faults everywhere. For example, people even see faults in His Holiness the Dalai Lama, a man who truly is the representation of Buddha Shakyamuni himself. He is like a sun in this world. When you think about the faults of your friend, to the same degree your love decreases. If you continue to criticize and see the faults in your friends, eventually there will be no more love left, and you will begin to see each other like enemies. So in that moment, when you see the fault in others, ask yourself a question: how is my mind in this moment? If it becomes very rigid like an ice block, it will not see how things actually are. When we practice pure view, we are acknowledging how things actually are. We are not superimposing any purity. Unless we are already enlightened, we initially begin from a biased view in which, for example, one only sees oneself as pure and the rest is impure. When you look closer, it becomes clear how foolish this view is. It does not correspond to reality. In reality, we are the same and have the same basic wishes. We have a natural tendency to see ourselves as clean and the rest as dirty. When someone is ill, we are afraid of catching that illness. But this can only happen if there is a karmic connection. If there is no karma, there is no cause for any illness. When I was in prison, I shared my space with the Gelugpa Tulku for 20 years. He was very sick and often in the hospital. When they put him in hospital, he was left there all alone. Nobody came close to him or used his things because they were afraid they would contact his illness. I spent 20 years with him together. We shared the same room, the same bowls, and during this whole time, I never contracted his illness. When you compare that with the kind of societal panic that we have over pandemics and viruses that truthfully can't be stopped. Swine flu? So continuing with this Tantra, I think something I think it's helpful that we're doing on Thursday nights is, the Tibetans, they present all these incredible teachings to us, but they often don't give kind of a primer or something, kind of an overview of an explanation of what it is. I mean, the empowerment itself is this intense blessing, but we often don't appreciate it as that. And so I think there's a place for not interpretation, but explanation, preparing. So I found this chapter from a Geshe on what is Tantra. He leads into this first by talking about the path of the perfections, and he ends that saying, developing correct view, learning to cherish others, recognizing, reducing, and finally abandoning self-cherishing, and developing universal compassion and the precious mind of bodhicitta, all are included within the common path explained by Buddha in his sutra teachings. To fulfill quickly, though, the wish of our supreme intention of bodhicitta, Buddha taught the uncommon path of Mahamudra Tantra. So he continues, what is Tantra? Although Tantra is very popular, not many people understand its real meaning. Some people deny Buddha's tantric teachings, whereas others misuse them for worldly attainments, and many people are confused about the union of sutra and tantra practice, mistakenly believing that sutra and tantra are contradictory. But in the condensed Heruka root tantra, Buddha says, you should never abandon highest yoga tantra, but realize that it has inconceivable meaning, and is the very essence of Buddha Dharma. Unquote. When we understand the real meaning of Tantra, there will be no basis for misusing it, and we shall see that there are no contradictions at all between Sutra and Tantra. Practicing Sutric teachings is the basic foundation for practicing Tantric teachings, and the practice of Tantra is the quick path to fulfill the ultimate goal of the Sutra. For example, in his Sutra teachings, Buddha encourages us to abandon attachment, and in Tantra, he encourages us to transform our attachment into the spiritual path. Some people may think this is a contradiction, but it is not, because Buddha's tantric instructions on how to transform attachment into the spiritual path are the quick method for abandoning attachment. In this way, they are the method to fulfill the aims of sutra teachings. As mentioned above, universal compassion accomplished through the practice of sutra teachings and the wisdom of Mahamudra Tantra accomplished through the practice of tantric teachings are like the two wings of a bird. Just as both wings are equally important for a bird to fly, so both sutra and tantra are equally important for practitioners seeking enlightenment. And of course, this is why here, we're trying to just simply transmit the full range of the Drikung teachings. And it's for exactly this reason. They're equally important, wisdom and compassion. It's no criticism of compassion to say that you need wisdom. And it's no criticism of wisdom to say that you need compassion. Tantra is defined as an inner realization that functions to prevent ordinary appearances and conceptions and to accomplish the four complete purities. So an inner realization that functions to prevent ordinary appearances and to prevent ordinary conceptions. Or just conceptions, he said. Although Buddhist tantric scriptures are sometimes called tantra because they reveal tantric practices, actual tantra is necessarily an inner realization that protects living beings from ordinary appearances and conceptions, which are the root of samsara's sufferings. Tantra, secret mantra, Vajrayana are synonymous. The four complete purities are the pure environment, the pure body, pure enjoyments and activities of a Buddha. For living beings, the experience of worldly pleasures is the main cause of increasing their attachment, and therefore the main cause of increasing their problems. To stop attachment arising from the experience of worldly pleasures, Buddha taught Tantra as a method to transform worldly pleasure into the path to enlightenment. In accordance with the different levels of transforming worldly pleasures into the path, Buddha taught 4 levels or classes of Tantra. Action Tantra, that's Kriya. Performance Tantra, Upa. Yoga Tantra, and highest Yoga Tantra. The first 3 are called the lower Tantras. That's Action Tantra, Performance Tantra, and Yoga Tantra. In highest Yoga Tantra, Buddha taught the most profound instructions for transforming sexual bliss into the quick path to enlightenment. Since the effectiveness of this practice depends upon gathering and dissolving the inner winds into the central channel through the power of meditation, these instructions were not explained by Buddha in the lower Tantras. In the lower Tantras, Buddha taught instructions on how to transform worldly pleasures other than sexual bliss into the path to enlightenment through imagination, which is a simpler practice of Tantra. The gateway through which we enter Tantra is receiving a tantric empowerment. And empowerment bestows upon us special blessings that heal our mental continuum and awaken our Buddha nature. When we receive a tantric empowerment, we are sowing the special seeds of the 4 bodies of a Buddha upon our mental continuum. So sometimes you hear the 4 bodies of the Buddha. We've been talking here more traditionally about the 3 bodies of the Buddha. These 4 bodies are the nature truth body, that's the Svabhavivaka Kaya, the wisdom truth body, Dharma Kaya, the enjoyment body, Sambhogakaya, and the emanation body, Nirmanakaya. Ordinary beings do not possess more than one body, whereas Buddhists possess 4 bodies simultaneously. A Buddha's emanation body is their gross body, which can be seen by ordinary beings. The enjoyment body is their subtle body, which can be seen only by practitioners who have gained higher realizations. And the nature and wisdom truth bodies are the very subtle bodies that only Buddhas themselves can see. In Tantra, the principal objects to be abandoned are ordinary conceptions and ordinary appearances. The terms ordinary conceptions and ordinary appearances are best explained by the following example. Suppose there is a Heruka practitioner called John. Normally he sees himself as John, and his environment, enjoyments, body, and mind as John's. These appearances are ordinary appearances. The mind that assents to these ordinary appearances by holding them to be true is ordinary conception. The appearances we have of an inherently existent I, mine, and other phenomenon are also ordinary appearances. Self-grasping and all other delusions are ordinary conceptions. Ordinary conceptions are obstructions to liberation. Obstructions to liberation. Ordinary appearances are obstruction to omniscience. In general, all sentient beings, except bodhisattvas who have attained the Vajra-like concentration of the path of meditation, have ordinary appearances. So you might recall the path of meditation. You know the 5 paths? The first one, the path of accumulation, or gathering merit, purifying, which leads to the path of application, where we are applying this sort of increased mental power, concentration, force, you might say, onto looking into the nature of the mind, which leads to the path of seeing, where there's a first initial deep breakthrough, which leads to the path of meditation that he's describing here, where gradually, higher and higher, the kleshas are purified, and finally the obscurations of knowledge are purified, leading to the final path, which is the path of no more learning, Buddhahood. All right, so in general, all sentient beings, except bodhisattvas who have attained the Vajra-like concentration of the path of meditation, have ordinary appearances. Now, if John were to meditate on the generation stage of Heruka, strongly regarding himself as Heruka, and believing his surroundings, experience, body, and mind to be those of Heruka, at that time he would have the divine pride, the Vajra pride, that prevents ordinary conceptions. If he were also to attain clear appearance of himself as Heruka, with the environment, enjoyments, body, and mind of Heruka, at that time he would have the clear appearance that prevents him from perceiving ordinary appearances. At the beginning, ordinary conceptions are more harmful than ordinary appearances. How this is so is illustrated by the following analogy. Suppose a magician conjures up an illusion of a tiger in front of an audience. The tiger appears to both the audience and the magician. But whereas the audience believes that the tiger actually exists and consequently become afraid, the magician does not assent to the appearance of the tiger and so remains calm. The problem for the audience is not so much that a tiger appears to them as much as their conception that the tiger actually exists. It is this conception, rather than the mere appearance of the tiger, that causes them to experience fear. If, like the magician, they had no conception that the tiger existed, then even though they still had an appearance of a tiger, they would not be afraid. In the same way, even though things appear to us as ordinary, if we do not conceptually grasp them as ordinary, this will not be so harmful. Similarly, it is less damaging to our spiritual development that our spiritual guide appears to us as ordinary, and yet we hold him or her to be in essence a Buddha, it's less damaging to do that than it is for our spiritual guide to appear to us as ordinary and for us to believe that he or she is ordinary. The conviction that our Lama is a Buddha, even though he or she may appear to us as an ordinary person, helps our spiritual practice to progress rapidly. To reduce ordinary appearances and conceptions, Buddha taught the Tantra of the generation stage. And to abandon these two obstructions completely, Buddha taught the Tantra of the completion stage, especially Mahamudra Tantra. By completing our training in these Tantras, we shall become a tantric enlightened being, such as Heruka, with the complete purities of environment, body, enjoyments, and activities of a Buddha. So there you have it. This pure view, pure perception. The Tantra is taught as these two phases, the generation stage and then the completion stage. We emphasize more the generation stage here just for obvious reasons. The generation stage has the effect of purifying and decreasing, therefore, ordinary appearances. We're visualizing ourselves as a Buddha. And if you understand that everything is the projection of mind, we're projecting samsara all the time. And so we're taking a break from that, you might say, in our meditation, and we're projecting ourselves as Vajrakalaya, Tara, whatever Buddha it is. Now, there's so much that goes along with this, but that very practice and then making it a habit. And of course, when you do this kind of practice, you realize, you see how distracted and distractible your mind is. We see that in ordinary meditation too, of course. But the genius of the Tantra is that you can sort of see, you can sort of see the results of your practice in that. And that can be very helpful. Although it may be something that takes, 20 years because the distractions are so overwhelming. And yet people can have experiences at different stages along the path too. Sometimes just immediately, coming across the Dharma, they can have some pure perception, enough to keep you going. This is the thing. It's extremely important. We're not trying to recreate any experiences. We're not even seeking after experiences. We're practicing bodhicitta through this exceptional method. When you feel the need, even conceptually, even just seemingly artificially, but training ourselves to think about sentient beings and then realize at least the importance of it, why we need to be doing this, even for ourselves, the need to be doing it. That constant training is habituating the mind. And this is really helpful because all of that is adding to our merit. We don't necessarily see it or feel it or anything there, but it's there. None of these things are wasted. It's like it said, stored in the alaya consciousness. And when the conditions are right, things can manifest. Those conditions can be, who knows, perceiving something in a particular way. It can be meeting a great Lama. It can be some random thought that is suddenly triggering something in your mind. There are just no rules to any of this. The texts are presented and the teachings are presented in this very, logical, rational kind of way because it's useful for us to have a clear understanding conceptually of all these things. But in the actual practice, it can be a different thing. If you try to hold up some sort of, gridiron of these conventional teachings in your mind, that's a mistake. You just simply practice wholeheartedly, but we have those teachings as, guidance to show us when we're off the path or we're practicing in the wrong way. So it's this constant practice of self-correction, of experience, and seeing us, dribble off the path and space out and all the different things we do, but we have the basic teachings so we can correct ourselves. And then, of course, you have the immediate, experiential bliss of contact with great teachers and with, truly a Dharma center itself. All right, so let's pause there for a sec. Any questions on this? Because again, the Tantra is seemingly highly esoteric.
Frank, just to have one, I could keep question. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I just wanted to say, I mean, my God, I have thousands of questions, actually. Just, I mean, literally, we're literally supposed to be walking around, perceiving everything as nectar in the streams, or working, and angels, the dog barking as dharmic sounds, and I mean,
The
that's
concept.
the concept,
The
yeah.
concept that
Okay.
is true. That's
Okay,
where it
right,
starts.
right. Thank you. Well, imagining it is what makes it real,
That's right.
as you just
Right.
explained.
Because you want to
So, yeah.
avoid any kind of criticism of yourself.
Right,
Of like, I see that guy as my boss and he's an asshole.
right, right, right.
You don't. That's just a distraction. But conceptually, for starters, Buddha's right. Buddha's not wrong.
Right.
So when he says that all of this is projection of mind, I find that very helpful because,
Yes.
sometimes we go to try and have the result and the result is not there and it's discouraging or we sort of forget. But the basic principle is that this is all projection of the mind.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of amazing to know that. And of course, the what's controlling the projection of the mind is karma, according to it. And it's actually proof why the Tantra works. So
Yeah,
it's
exactly. And when you
amazing,
think
yeah.
that, and then
Yeah.
you see how in your own life you're projecting all the time, and it becomes easier to believe that this whole scientific world is actually a projection of mind.
Right.
I mean, it's such a radical thought,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it all fits together.
Yeah, for sure.
You
It's
know,
kind of amazing.
That's it.
Well,
And
I'm-
also, you can have, that's helpful too, because you can see from thinking in this way, paying attention to what's happening, all the appearances, what's going on. It happens. You see how you go from a moment of anger to a moment of joy, or perplexity into humor. I mean, it changes so fast.
Yeah. And the
So
rising
we
and
see there's
passing,
nothing
for sure.
solid there, really. It's just
Right.
but our habits are strong to look
Yeah,
at
it's-
something and see it one way.
Well, just like you mentioned earlier in the book, like it literally said everything's a habit. I don't know the precise words that
Yeah.
you said, but it's amazing, and it's the habits that are creating the projection that our minds are. It's amazing. Yeah, it's thank you.
How positive, too. I mean, think about that. Because ordinarily people are suffering all over the world and feel powerless.
Yeah,
Or in the ones with power are even worse deluded because they think that they have power.
I know.
And then they always get the wrong result for what they want. And they can't figure out what's going on.
yeah, it's amazing. This might be relevant or not, but I just went to a home where they were in their late 80s. They were multimillionaires, and we took out a few bushes. I mean, literally charged them $1,000 to take out a couple bushes and put some mulch in. It was worth $1,000. It was very hard to do.
Yeah.
But literally, you can just see the cracking in the foundations. They're like, oh, all the stuff and all of the the desire for new suits and the planes we have and everything. It didn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Keen.
Wow. Frank, thank you.
Yeah.
Of course.
I was wondering about, so you're saying samsara is our own mental projections, right? So we don't see ourselves as a Buddha because then those mental projections would be nirvana if we were seeing ourselves as a Buddha.
Yeah, so our mind has sort of like a tsunami with all sorts of stuff mixed up in it and flowing with it, and particles bouncing off each other, and then boulders swept along and crushing cars that it comes into. I mean, there's just all this activity. That's all the karma going on. But the nature of our mind is something you might say deeper than that, or at least the understanding of it. So there's the object to purify. There's all sorts of stains in our mind stream. And the practice of Dharma purifies that so that all that stuff isn't there. When, at least for one level, when the kleshas are stilled, then the world appears, as a pure land, or as nirvana, you might say. There are different types of nirvana that Kempo talks about. But nonetheless, yes, when that agitation in the mind is not there, suddenly things appear as they are. And there's even an indication of this in one of those poems by William Blake. I think he said, when the mind is, I can't remember how he said it. When the mind is free, or the mind is, I can't remember what he said, but the world will appear as it is, infinite. So he even sort of touched on that same idea, that if we get rid of all our selfishness, because we have this self-grasping, we see everything through this lens of what's in it for me. And that's all that's coming in. The other stuff's coming in, but we're just simply not paying attention to it. If you can think about it, it's like when you have a great headache. Bodhicitta just goes out the window, because you're just, yeah, the hangnail, the kleshas colonize our mind. And all that other stuff is there, but it's just not, like Kempo says, what is it? He always likes that example. Is it 370 or 720? I can't remember, mind moments in the snap of a finger. And so, a great meditator can see those different moments, but not to be discouraged. You don't have to have that level of concentration.
The other thing is, we're not supposed to criticize ourselves, because we're not supposed to tarnish a Buddha, right? So that means if we're criticizing ourselves, that means we're harming a Buddha. Is that correct?
No. You can criticize yourself, but you don't grasp onto the criticism. So, in other words, when you're meditating, in a sense, it's a criticism in the classic sense. When an affliction comes up, you recognize it, but you just don't go with it. So, in a sense, that's criticism. You're seeing things as they are. You're seeing the limited mind doing its thing, but you've been trained and learned conceptually that that's not you, really. That's just your afflictive thought. So you recognize it. And so that, in a sense, that's criticism. But what you don't do is like, oh, damn me, it's come up again and again and again. That's self-grasping. That's giving solidity, mental solidity, to that separate self. That's what you don't do. It's just the free-flowing. There's no self there. There's just the klesha. And that's freedom in itself. Yes.
And what you think about becomes real for you.
And that's exactly right. It becomes real. This is the power of the mind. This is the power of the projection. But once even to understand, just intellectually even, the power of that projection, that is so incredibly positive. Because instead of, I'm just suffering and things are falling out of the universe on top of me, and woe is me, and how can I maybe change my outer situation, but then that guy's in the way and I don't have the talents to do it. All of that is seen to be false. And yet you have to deal with it, but we deal with it not by wrestling with it, so to speak, but just seeing into its nature, just letting it go.
So space junk falls in my house. That's a blessing.
That's a blessing. There you go. I think of it sometimes like old-fashioned movie reels, too. I mean, it's just those individual frames, but they're happening so quickly and one after another that it gives the illusion of solidity. Think of Marilyn Monroe. Every single frame, she's this beautiful image on the screen, but it's just all these individual images. She's not really there at all, but looks so real. But once you know that sort of cuts the root of it. Now, there's a deeper cutting the roots where there's actually an experiential seeing of the falsity of that, or the reality of what's going on, without the attachment to it and all the stuff that comes up, from that. That's the free flow. This is complete limitlessness. You can see this aspect, you might say, of the Dharmakaya that's just without limit. It's just, you can go anywhere. So the understanding, though, of the mental projection is the great truth and the great opportunity, because suddenly there's something we can do. So even though you're doing it and it seems to be stymied again and again and again and again and again, that's just habit. That's just habit. Because you know you found the path, even though the path may be full of all sorts of brambles and stuff, you're still on a path. And that is completely qualitatively different than not being on a path, which is samsara, just going around and around in circles. You know, next thing you know, you're Deva. Hey, isn't this great? And the next thing you know, you're slagging molten copper in hell. I mean, it's like around and around and around. What did I see today? Oh, I was chuckling the other day because I saw somebody recommended an article to me in the British newspaper, The Guardian, and for some reason it triggered in my monkey mind a comment that was written by this the man who discovered Mother Teresa, Malcolm Muggeridge. He was a classic kind of British socialist atheist type, and in his life he became a Christian convert, and he wrote his autobiography in, what was it, Chronicles of Wasted Time. That's what he called his life story. And in there, he had been a journalist for the Guardian newspaper in England, and so he had said some funny things to say about that, because they were just sort of, I don't know, enamored of the Soviet Union back when Stalin was doing his thing and everyone was pretending they didn't see what was going on. So what happened was, I came across today a quote, paradoxically, of him talking about this whole thing that happened in the West in the 1930s, where he talked about crazed clergymen, he talked about drooling dons in universities, he talked about, some of these great writers. All these people wanted to believe this thing, and so they just couldn't see what was going on. But what struck me about it was the circular nature of samsara. People saw that then, and now similar things happen now, but it just goes around and around and around. People are inherently deluded, and we do all sorts of stupid stuff again and again and again, and then we're kind of surprised when it happens because everyone forgot everything that happened 15 minutes ago. Besides, they were bad people, so we don't have to pay attention to them. It's just this kind of thing. But for us to have that understanding that you're on a path, it is, again, qualitatively different. There can be all sorts of thorns. You can be barefoot. You can be falling off the path. But even that is good because there's a path to get back onto. It's qualitatively different than this mindless just going around and around and around in circles, looking for happiness all the time. Yeah, Rogo. Another one.
Thanks. There we go. So Frank, you mentioned that not seeing. It's interesting that it went from 64 movements of the mind per finger snap to 800 and 180. I'm like, that's just great.
I love all the numbers.
I know. I'm just like, that's great.
Why do we do 108?
Stop. I know.
Right.
Yeah. What's impressive though is just like the Abhidhamma Kosha. I mean, there's these people with mental capacity can tell you the 15 thoughts after you see emptiness.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you just mentioned that breaking down reality and seeing those individual moments isn't that important. Can you explain more of why, and obviously I'm leaning towards you being correct, of course. Of course. Well, no, it makes more sense to just pretend this is a Pure Land and pretend that and to imagine that and go along instead of me trying to literally see the thought as it appears, for the seed manifesting to becoming the teapot.
Mm-hmm.
I've read a lot of books. That's not from personal experience. And doing insight meditation for the rest of my life.
Well,
okay.
There's only one thing going on. This is really the genius, but we're sort of at different levels ourselves from moment to moment. Different levels of openness, different levels of understanding, different kind of colorations and conditionings. because the Tantra is the practice of insight meditation, but not the formal sutric insight meditation. Yeah, yeah. So the vividness, the aliveness of it, I mean, if you think about it, it makes sense. You know, in the sutra, we're calming the mind, got to do that. And then what happens? When the mind is calm, you know, realization or insights, but even with the practice of Vipassana, it starts out conceptually. You know, so, and that's such a tremendous empowering thing too, to realize you can use your thinking mind to get beyond the thinking mind. And suddenly everything, you know, that's the Pure Land. Everything's useful. Instead of us trying to get away from ourselves, which is this idea we have this self doesn't exist anyway. It's like somewhere one of the Chinese masters said, it's like we're always trying to put a head on top of our head. One head's enough. So it's just different strokes for different folks. Because for some people, the kind of almost objective, almost scientific, psychological aspect of that. Let's just look at the mind in each moment arising and all of that. And it's often have a very materialistic kind of viewpoint, really. But on the other hand, if you have the requisite faith, and it doesn't even have to be believing things in a conceptual way, of course, all that helps. But, you know, again, I can only say my own experience is you meet someone like Gaura Rinpoche, and it just happens that it didn't pick me out and say, do this, but you find yourself in an event, I guess I'll go to this. And he tells everyone there, well, okay, this is your practice. And well, I wouldn't have come. It's like, but when you have that kind of whatever, but I'm not trying to make my own example as some sort of path that people should be on. It's completely
Frank, I love it when you
individual.
talk about your personal experiences. It makes it more real. So thank you.
Well, it's just stumbling. That's why it sounds real, stumbling on the path. But it can be anything for anyone in different ways. And so there are some, for instance, you know, one of the biggest organizations, certainly in movements of the modern day, what's called Vipassana insight practices, comes from I think he was Burmese, Goenka. Goenka. And he started out as a non-believer, but he had migraine headaches. And so in an attempt to deal with his headaches, he got interested in meditation. And then the next thing you know, he's like, you know, Mr. Bodhisattva. Because if you had told I don't know, but if you had told someone like that, hey, why don't you meditate on a Pure Land? Why don't you meditate on yourself as a Buddha? It might not have worked for him. Although I bet now he can do it, you know, but I'm just speculating wildly. But I'm just saying that 84,000 different practices, that's why. You don't know what's going to work. And you can also have something that, you know, here you are with something that really moves you, so to speak, and is your practice truly, but 20 years ago would not have been. So it's like, you know, you start with taking a little bit of muscle relaxant, and then you can take some purgative.
That was really well said. Thanks, Frank. Anyone else? Anyone? Going once? Stephanie, any questions? Okay, no, he's okay. Thank you, Frank.
So I think, though, that for some people, it's just like a lot of the stuff that's here at White Lotus is just really kind of inexplicable. You know, I mean, like, what the hell? All these symbols and all these activities and the music and meditation and what is going on. But the key thing in the generation stage of practice, and again, somewhere the Lama said it's the generation stage is like pulling back on a bow. You know, you're just in that practice, you're building up all sorts of tension, not anxiety tension, but power, you know, and the generation and completion. The completion practice is letting go of the bow. He'll have more to say about that in a couple of weeks. But the important thing is that this practice of generating ourselves, this Vajra pride, is the most important quality. And that, of course, is the Vipassana aspect. I mean, you're concentrating, but you can even use that in a concentrative way too, just to thinking about it that way or feeling yourself. So the Vajra pride, I am. This is not phony. I really am Tara. And then the clear awareness. So you're seeing everything clearly. And again, that's an effort of mind to be working on the the visualization itself. And if you're like me, it can seem really pointless because it's just like so overwhelming, the distractions on that level. Even when you have some degree of concentration on a kind of a worldly level, following your breath or one thing or the other, but to do the whole mandala or even the Buddha itself, it's just like, because you're just dealing with the mind, your mind. There's nothing to hang on to in a physical way. When you're doing your breaths, you still have this somatic sense going on, and of course that's a lot easier. It's grosser. You can see how it's grosser. It's nirmanakaya. But with the tantra, we're dealing with the sambhogakaya, and that is inherently more slippery. But how wonderful, because the teaching is in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, that in the Bardo experience after death, that's just it. You're not grounded in this body. And so therefore, it can go anywhere. And so your kleshas, your negative thoughts, seemingly have all sorts of power. They're like shot out of guns. But conversely, your virtuous thoughts have that same kind of power. So everything that we're going through here, and training ourselves in bodhicitta, even just the mentioning of it every time we do a practice, think how many mind moments there is in a lifetime of that. And how powerful that really is, even though, it's easy for us to criticize ourselves and say, oh, this is just not very much. But compared to the worldly being that's not doing that at all, and having the training to know where to focus your mind in that Bardo state. And of course, because it's more fluid, it's more powerful, you might say. I mean, we can feel the obscurations we have now. You sit down to meditate and it's just like, oh my goodness, my back hurts and I'm tired. And it's just like you feel the grossness of of reality, of our existence. But in the Bardo, that's not there. So when you're trained for it, suddenly it's like, you've been practicing going to the basket with, chains tied on your feet. And now you take it off and you can fly. Okay. All right. All right. Anything else? We're still trying to do our little survey of the Tantra, Steffi. Yeah, but especially for the Tibetan Book of the Dead, I think it's useful as our Sangha ages.
I am not, what is it? Well, I say this all the time. Life causes death or serious injury. We're not getting out.
Yeah, right.
We're going to die.
No one gets out of this alive. He said, but see, that's where I differ, because we do get out of it alive. we just think we're dead. And what's the other one? Yeah, I can't remember. It was some classic statement of, it was Oscar Wilde, who said sometimes at the funeral, the only live thing is in the box.
She got up.
Right. Well, I mean in a different way.
It's like, I'm not dead yet.
I'm not dead yet. Okay, let's do the dedication and see if I can find one from Jigten Simkin. May the suffering of all beings cease. May each and every one come to recognize his or her true nature, and shoulder the burden of liberating all beings until each every one of them is the Buddha that exists right now in their heart. May we never stop until this is true, and may all sentient beings be free. Swaha. Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. Yeah.